like, there are a bunch of different ways to make games, and, like, I'm really proud of my layouts, and I think that, like, they do a good job conveying, you know, like, the recent ones, the ones that aren't really old and are just downloaded Google Docs. Like, I really want to make sure that it's, like, you know, the game is first.
My name is Jeremy Gage, and welcome to the Draw Your Dice podcast. This is an educational show involving all things tabletop role-playing industry. Listen alongside me as we hear from creators, entrepreneurs, and supporters about their personal best practices, principles, and philosophies. I encourage anyone from the budding game designer to a seasoned publisher and everyone in between to sit down with us and enjoy today's episode. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Draw Your Dice podcast. My name is Jeremy Gage, as you heard in the intro, but as always, it is not about me. It is about a very special guest today. This person you've heard on a number of podcasts, and you may have seen a Kickstarter here in the recent few weeks. I would like to welcome to the show Riley Rethal.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks for being here. As always, Riley, for the people of the show, would you just give a brief introduction of who you are in case they haven't heard of you before as you present yourself to the internet?
Yeah, so my name is Riley Rethal. You can find me on Twitter at Riley Rethal. You can find the games that I write at metagame.itch.io. I design games. I like doing it a lot.
Amazing. Great. Then that's the best reason why you're here. In addition to that, what was sort of your, as an additional icebreaker to the show, as always, what sort of is your lineage of getting into game design? Maybe what was the first game that got you into the hobby or discipline, or and what was maybe the first game that said, ooh, I could write something for this?
Yeah, so my senior year of high school, I got into Dungeons and Dragons actual plays. Watched and listened to those for a while. I got invited to a D&D game with like a bunch of friends that had like were the people who got me into those shows. And so I played that started like through like 2017. It's not even like looking back, I wasn't having a good time. Like I knew I wasn't having a good time. I was anxious. So much of it, but it's like, well, it's D&D, it's the thing. I really like listening to these podcasts. Like, it's my friends, they're great, they're all really invested in their characters, but I just like, I felt awful like 80% of the time. And it's wild looking back at that time where I just felt like I had to do that. Except I'm still glad that I did, because that eventually got me into Friends at the Table, which I just like immediately fell in love with. I started listening to that the beginning of my freshman year of college, kind of obsessively, one might say. There was a month where I caught up where I was listening to 8 hours a day, which I don't think was healthy. I was also in school. It was just freshman year of college. But so what really like ended up changing a lot was that summer. It was my second summer working at a Jewish science and technology camp, because that is a real thing that exists. It's great. And me and my really good friend, who I'd also gotten into Friends at the Table, Rose, we ran electives for like role-playing games. So we played a little bit of Dungeon World, and then we were like, oh man, they played The Quiet Year in Friends at the Table. We'd like love to run that with the kids. Neither of us had played it before. We just like decided to do this, and like it changed my life. Like literally, like the entire day after, like, it was the first morning elective, we played The Quiet Year, started it. I'm sure that looking back I played it wrong, because I had just skimmed the instructions like that day, because I was a camp counselor, you don't have a lot of time. And like I was just ecstatic for the rest of the day. Like I was like, God, it just made me so happy, because I was like, this is the kind of game I want to play. And then that same summer, the assistant director, now director of the camp, shout out to Jamie, she like was also just like happened to be like a video game, role-playing game kind of fan. And she was like, hey, I have this game that you guys might like. It's called Dialect. Do you want to like borrow it? And so that last day off that a bunch of counselors had, me and Rose got some of our other friends, and we played it. We literally played it 2.5 times during our 24 hours being off because like it was so much fun. I'm trying to remember the first. Oh, we played it's like the Blades in the Dark inspired backdrop. And we did it as like we were like a cat cafe, I guess, but for like exotic animals. Our language was like communicating to each other about like the crimes that we were doing, which is like the point of the backdrop. It was so good. I played the horrible police officer's daughter who like was the only person who got out unscathed in the end.
Yes, use that status.
it was a really great commentary on my part. Obviously. But yeah, so like those were the two games. Like the Quiet Year for being like this is the exact kind of game that I want to play. Like I really didn't like in D&D, and like as I kind of learned later, it wasn't just D&D. Like I have problems specifically about D&D, but I also just have I have trouble playing games where it's like, oh, the GM like has this whole thing planned out, and like you are kind of in this video game-esque mode where you're like just acting as this one character. Like my joke is like, I act as a single individual all the time, like I'm forced to take initiative as an individual all the time. I don't want to do that in a game. Like that's not a power fantasy for me. That's not an escape. Like I want to have the escapist fantasy of being able to control like wider things in society, because like I can't do that on my own. Mm-hmm. So like that's what really appeals to me about games like The Quiet Year and Dialect. And I came home. It's now on my itch page. It took a while to get there because it was like before I officially started designing games, but I wrote a backdrop about like being a camp counselor. Because camp counselors definitely like have their own language that they create like in the camp. So you can download that for free. It's just a Google Doc.
And was that was that a game that you created based on your experience at the time, or reflecting on that experience at the time, or is it based on something?
Yeah, so it's a Dialect backdrop. It's not like a full game. So Dialect, I should say, is a game where you are creating a language, and then you're kind of watching it die. Which I think one day I'm gonna write like the Dialect hack or whatever, where like you can just make a language that's longer or different. But that's a whole other thing. Mm-hmm. And so, like, it comes with these backdrops where, you kind of answer these questions about your group. It's called the isolation. And then it has, like, little, like, oh, in your first round, this is the thing that happens that starts to show that there's a problem. And then, like, here's the thing, it gets worse. And the last thing is, like, oh, your language is gone. So, obviously, like, a camp counselor, you can't be like, you're dying in the cold of space or whatever. So one of them was just, oh, the summer's ending. And the other one was, which God, looking back is even more like, was like, basically there was an epidemic going around camp and everyone was getting sick and they had to close it, which did not happen that summer, but there was there were counselors that brought whooping cough and it went around. I had to go to the clinic twice. It was a mess that summer. So that was definitely sort of based, at least, on real life experience, which,
yeah, woo, woo. I'm still waiting for the next 2 years per the recording of this episode. Let's figure it out, pandemic folk. What an amazing story! I love all that. I feel like it's one of the more unique versions of tabletop lineage that I've seen. I mean, everyone's lineage is very similar in the fact that I played a game, I really loved the game, I made the game, and so. But it's nice to hear sort of that unique path there. I am also a fellow binger, especially when it comes to like anime and things of that nature. Mm. I will crush out an anime in a day if someone tells me it's good enough, or if I find that it's good enough. I remember I watched. When Demon Slayer got super hyped up by Ninja on Twitter, I was like, oh, this is actually probably interesting. I probably crushed all 19 episodes in 2 days. Or, better yet, I watched all of Steven Universe in like 4 days.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a lot.
I don't do it a lot, but when I do, it's like to a level where people are asking me if I'm okay.
Yeah. No, I feel that. I totally slack on writing and things for sure. I'm like, I need to absorb all of this right now. Amazing. I'm still the Quiet Year is still on my bucket list of to reads because you're probably the 15th person to have recommended it to me on the show. But Dialect, I think actually there's been one. I think maybe it was Gordy Murphy, who also talked about Dialect because of his game. Apotheosis, where you sort of create an oral story and see how that changes over generations.
Oh, that's cool.
It's very
love
cool.
That.
But amazing, great. Well, let's get into the meat and potatoes of the damn show, the middle section. Let's talk about Galactic 2E. So this is the second edition. I'm not privy to the first edition, so Riley, would you share with everyone maybe what the spark was to create the first edition, and maybe also the spark that you're like, man, I may have to revisit this and add some things?
Yeah, so the first edition of Galactic I wrote, I started writing in December 2019 and then finished in, like January, February 2020, which is so weird to think about now. It feels like it was so much longer ago than that. Yeah. Time is extremely fake. But basically, I watched The Rise of Skywalker, and I am possibly the only person I know that like genuinely had such a good time watching that movie. It wasn't good. It was a very bad movie. But like as someone who like I didn't get into Star Wars until The Force Awakens came out. Like I had watched 4 and 5, not in that order. I'd watched 5 in 7th grade and 4 in 10th grade, both for school, like in school. So that's a very weird way to watch Star Wars. And like I didn't really care about it. But Force Awakens came out and people were like saying really good things about it. So I saw it and like it was just so like joyful, like especially like the scene where Finn and Poe escape in the X-Wing or in the TIE fighter or whatever it is at the beginning of that movie, like is one of my favorite scenes in any movie ever because like there's just so much genuine like joy and it made me so happy. And so like that kind of was what got me into Star Wars. And like watching Rise of Skywalker was like, I knew like the thing is I had problems with The Last Jedi just because I only care about Finn and Poe and they were kind of both screwed over. That's a whole other thing. I don't need, it's whatever. The Last Jedi is a movie that exists.
We can dive in.
And so and also because it was J.J. Abrams, like I knew this wasn't going to be a good movie. Mm-hmm. Like at best it was going to be like have a couple things that were good. Mm-hmm. So I'm glad that they just went, no, we're going to do like the stupidest nonsense possible. It just felt like a parody of everything that I already thought was like silly about Star Wars. Like everyone's related. God, I can't even remember what else. But, like, me and my brother were just dying laughing the whole time. And, like, I had so much... Like, that is the most fun that I've had watching a movie, probably. Well, until I saw Knives Out, like, a month later. And that was... So, like, whatever. That Knives Out is probably my favorite movie ever. But that's a whole other thing.
Love it. Love that movie.
It's very good. So, anyways, like, after that, I was thinking a lot about Star Wars. And... I had just come off writing Venture, which was my first Belonging Outside Belonging game, a month before. And for some reason, I was like, I gotta write another one. So I worked on that, through winter break until a little later. And so, basically what that was like a standard Belonging Outside Belonging game. It had 6 playbooks, which 2E still has, and 4 setting elements. Those are all the same in Galactic 2E. The main thing that was different was just it didn't have all of the stuff that I kind of added to BOB, and it didn't have the Wander Home inspiration because Wander Home wasn't out yet. So it was like a very basic kind of, Belonging Outside Belonging game. Mm-hmm. The main things that I changed were, just like Venture, I got rid of regular moves because they don't work with me. I don't really get the point of them. Mm-hmm.
I love that change. I love that change wholeheartedly. I think lateral moves are very, very cool.
Yeah, thank you. That's a new 2E thing. Mm-hmm. So it just was strong and weak moves. And then the other thing that I did was I took lures out of the playbooks and I put them in the setting elements instead.
Mm-hmm.
Because I wanted there to be, like, incentive to interact with the setting elements, which, like, there really wasn't
Smart.
in, like, regular BOB. So those are the main things that I did in Galactic 1E. And I kind of knew, like, I can do better. I just don't want to right now. You know, it had been in my mind for a long time. Like, I want to go back to this game. In a way that I didn't with Venture, just because I feel like Venture kind of is more of a thesis than it is a game. Mm-hmm. It's like, this is what you can do with D&D tropes. I made it good. Here you go. Whereas Galactic is like, I want to be able to tell stories like Star Wars. Like, the things that interest me about Star Wars are not the things the movies focus on. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm interested in the Force as, like, I was gonna say as a force, like, as a societal thing, you know? Like, it's a religious thing, but it also, like, exists in the world, so there are probably people who think about it in different ways. Like, that's what I want to explore. Like, let's actually talk about the fact that there's an oppressive empire and people fighting against it. Like, we can do more with that than just referencing Triumph of the Will, you know? So, like, that's really, like, I wanted that to be able to, like, tell stories. So the reason that I started working on the second edition when I did is basically, I have a mutual on Twitter, shout out to Jess, at Jess from Online on Twitter, who started a Galactic campaign and was like, yo, this game rules, you know, I'm having a lot of fun with it. And also she asked me, like, hey, why did you change lures from playbooks to setting elements? And so I kind of started explaining why I did that, which is like, I don't really like lures the way that they work in BOB because they are a move that the only person who can see it is the person who cannot use it. So that's not great for, like, actually being able to engage with it. They also feel really specific. And I also just wanted the setting elements to be able to be engaged with in the token economy. And I was like, oh yeah, you know, maybe I'll kind of incorporate that more into a game because I've been thinking about revising it. And then, like, later that week, I woke up probably at like 4 or 5 a.m. I couldn't go back to sleep and was like, screw it. I'm going to open up this document that I haven't opened up in like a year. And the first thing that I did was I was looking at, I think it was the ACE playbook probably, because that's the first one in there. And I was looking at the moves, and I did a couple enters on some of the strong moves, and I wrote, I like went to the end of the move, and I wrote comma, and give them a token. And that's how it started. So that was kind of the first thing that I did, was adding lateral moves. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's great. There's so much more to explore here for sure. Mm-hmm. So probably one of my least, I guess this is a weird word for it, but like system phenomenons. So like Blades in the Dark is a system phenomenon. Powered by the Apocalypse is a system phenomenon. To me, this is like my own personal language. So Belonging Outside Belonging is sort of my least explored system, like the token-based sort of system. I get the general idea, but it's nice to be exposed to so many different variants of this game and how the moves and tokens are being manipulated here in Galactic specifically. When I've played two sessions of Sleepaway, and I played the ropes keeper both times. But I agree with you in that the regular moves, it was like, why am I using these? They don't really, like, sure, they can help guide maybe a narrative here, but they're not really supplying me any incentive to use them, right? I either want to use a strong move or I want to use a weak move. Kind of, I guess, specifically in this moment, since we're on the topic, what was the feeling you're trying to capture with lateral moves, and like why write them in this way?
Yeah, I do really quick, just because I think it's really interesting. I remember, like, back when it might have just been when Just Venture was out. I can't remember when it was, but I got a DM. I think it was from Jammy. Sorry if that's totally wrong. Jammy, love you. Jammy Najati, fantastic game designer, like, just amazing. I think it was them who messaged me, like, hey, how do you do BOB without regular moves? Like, how do you play that? And I was just like, what do you mean? Like, and like, for them, it was like really important for like their players who they'd played with, for like to understand like what their characters were doing. And like, that was really interesting to read too, just because like they just felt so useless to me. So like, you know, to be fair, # not all gamers or whatever. They are apparently useful to some people, and I respect that. However, they are also very hard for me to write, so they're still gone. But yeah, so lateral moves, it's one of those things where it feels like very natural for me to add to the BOB system, because honestly, looking at it almost feels like it's missing from the original one.
Interesting.
Which I think is what lures are supposed to do. But like BOB is a system where you are doing you're doing weak and strong moves, you're gaining tokens and you're losing tokens, but you don't really have a lot of chances to interact with the other characters. And I think that that works. It feels weird to say that and then be like, well, it works because these are games about community. But I think in the original Dream Apart and Dream Askew, it really works because these are about individual characters exploring their kind of individual relationships with each other. And it's not so much about oh, here, take this token and do this other thing. It might be, I'm going to take a token and then we can think about what that means because I just did a move. Whereas Galactic, I wanted it to be more like everything kind of fits into the mechanics of the game, because it's a game that's more about plot than most belonging outside belonging games. I think it works because it's supposed to be more cinematic. It's really what I look at, the way that I look at lateral moves is they're not about oh, this token represents like your energy or like your strength or whatever. Because there's literally, there's lateral moves that's like, I hurt you and give you a token, and there's lateral moves that are like, I heal you and gain you and give you a token. So like if you're looking at it as if it represents any kind of like in-world resource, that wouldn't make any sense. But if you look at it as like, these are representing like story beats, they're representing where the spotlight is, and like it totally makes sense, because when you do I hurt you and give you a token, you are saying, okay, I just, we were fighting and I just pushed you across the room and, now the spotlight is on you. What do you do? And that works as a story beat. And just as well, it works when, that same character comes back to the rest of their friends and is like, oh my God, I just had the worst fight. And somebody goes, oh, let me use my magic powers to heal you or whatever. Okay, now you have like the ability to fight back again. Like both of those things work as story beats because that is what they are supposed to be. So like I tried to say in the instructions for Galactic, and I did threads about it too, is like these are supposed to be about like sharing the spotlight. And like when you take a token, that's like you saying, I'm going to use this later. I'm going to do something cool later. When you give someone a token, you're saying, okay, now it's your turn, etc.
I fucking love that so much. I think that, I come from a very like trad game background, like D&D and video games and a bunch of resource management type stuff. And what I love here about lateral moves is the other part of my brain that's not that actually isn't often itched by a lot of role-playing games is the sense of like plot control and also player sharing. So what I mean by player sharing is like in improv, there's such a thing as like kicking the can. Like you're passing the ball over to somebody to have them engage with the narrative or theater of the mind that you're building on the stage. And I feel like in a lot of RPGs, those mechanics aren't explicitly built in, so it creates a lot of vagueness and wiggle room and abstraction for the players at the table who may not have the experience to understand those improv techniques, right? Someone who maybe sort of this is their first time role-playing, they don't really understand how to receive the ball or how to give the ball, right? But because you've built in these lateral moves, I think it's absolutely brilliant that it basically gives an option like, hey, I'm going to initiate this thing in our narrative, in our shared narrative right now, and I want you to be able to kick the ball back to me. Here's a token, right? So that later they can strong move or even do like come back with another lateral move. Like they can start, I think what it helps to do is help planning and seeing like where everybody's sort of going with each move used, right? It's adding sort of like a hand holding, both the system and each player are hand holding with each other when they say, I execute this lateral move. and now you have a sense of like where I want to go with your character, like where my character wants to go with your character. Let's see how you respond to that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's definitely a really good way of putting it, because like a lot of the tech that I added to Galactic 2E like is specifically for that purpose of like being able to set things up in the fiction and then being able to pay them off later. Like other things would be like now setting elements, which I call pillars now. Which I really like that word. I'm really happy with it. It was a last minute change, so I'm not even like used to it.
I've stolen it. It's fine. It's good.
Good. Those, they have moves now. Like they have setting elements have moves in BOB, but they have token moves. So they only have gaining tokens and giving and lateral move token. They don't have strong moves, just because I didn't really think that like really served a purpose. So there's that, and then also I have, which I stole from Wanderhome and then added a bunch of token stuff to it, is traits, which Wanderhome just has. Basically it's a D66 table of different traits, and then each of them have 3 moves, either gaining token moves or giving token moves, and you build a character by picking 2 of the traits or rolling for them, obviously. And then you pick 1 to 2 moves from each trait, and then you just have those. And then the NPCs, so those are for NPCs. And the NPCs are attached to the pillars. So you don't have to worry about like a bajillion token pools. You just have basically 4 extra. You have 1 for each pillar. And so basically my philosophy with the pillars and with the traits is the I keep wanting to call them weak moves, because that was another last minute change, because I knew I wanted to change. I did not want to call them that. It just does not work with what it is at all.
Sure.
So they're called vulnerable moves, and those are more for the players. Like the playbooks have vulnerable moves, and then really I would just call the ones for the pillars and the NPCs like gaining token moves, because they are just what they are is just more saying like, hi, I am a thing in this story now. Because like you could have an NPC that you just don't do anything with, but then you have your weak move. Like let's say your NPC is like cynical, so the gaining token move for cynical is roll your eyes and gain a token. So like that's not really like, you're not doing a lot when you just say, but that's like, oh, this character is in this scene too, and he rolls his eyes. Now you're saying, oh, okay, this character is engaged in it, and then you might use their other move. You know, I can't even think of what the other moves are, but like there's probably something that's like, explain why someone is wrong, you know? So then might say, oh, they roll their eyes and they give a whole speech about how your plan is bad and they should go with yours instead. Then now they're a character in the narrative. So that's kind of like, so the gaining token moves there are kind of about announcing that. It's the same thing with pillars. Like my favorite one is the mandate, which is like my serial numbers filed off version of the Empire. Yep. Which its gain a token move is foreshadow a larger threat and gain a token. So like you're doing the same thing there. You're saying like, oh, you're hacking this computer and you see that there's a file labeled Death Star. Ooh, what could that be? Or whatever, you know? So
what
then you
could that be?
I don't know. Totally unaffiliated Death Star. Sorry, Disney. I mean, Pain Planet. That's
Pain
not the same
Planet.
thing. You know.
I need that.
I feel like that's a whole other game that I am not the person to write.
Yeah.
But so like what you're doing there is you're foreshadowing the threat that you can then pay off later when you do the mandate move, put someone in immediate danger and give them a token. And then when you do that, you're saying, oh, you're in immediate danger. Now you have a token. What do? And you say, oh, I pull out my Astra Blade, which is my serial numbers filed off version of a lightsaber. And, you know, you kill the mandate officer who's holding you. Or maybe you don't actually get out, and that's a continued kind of token sharing thing. But like that's what all of those moves are. They're about like having a way to set things up. And the other thing that they do is I wanted to make it way easier for players to gain tokens, which is funny, like literally right before this, I listened to a couple episodes of Draw Your Dice today, as, you know,
Shucks.
research. And I listened to Eli Seitz talk about, it was not called Thursday yet, but his game Thursday, which I've also talked to him about, like, you know, with our voices. And like he also talked about how he wanted players to have more opportunities to get tokens, but like in a totally different way, which is really cool. Because like we both kind of had this thing where like in BOB you often feel like it's really hard when you only have weak moves. Like the only way that you can gain tokens is having your character specifically do a weak move. Where like maybe it's just not the time. Or playing into somebody's lure, which are very easy to forget they exist, and also they're very specific. So like that's not a lot of options, and so you also feel really precious about your strong moves. But when you have all of these options, like you have, oh, instead of doing something for me, I can go over to the mandate and say, ooh, what if there was a threat? Or I can go over to the liberation and be like, oh, here's an interesting rebel character to introduce, and I'm going to have them take a token for the liberation to then give me a token, and then I can spend the token, or whatever, or somebody, if you want to be like, hey, I want to do the strong move, can somebody do a lateral move at me? And somebody can do that. So, like, there's way more ways to get tokens, which means that people don't feel as precious about them. And so, like I just want them to be circulating way more.
Yeah. No, really, like, fuxing with the token economy is really powerful, because I felt similarly when I played Sleepaway in that, I was trying my best to engage as many, like, I am sort of the min-maxing power gamer. I come from like Diablo and action games, action RPGs and stuff like that. And so like I'm all about like getting as much as I can out of a system. And for Sleepaway, I was trying to engage in as many weak moves and strong moves as possible. I barely touched my regular moves. Often I would forget people's lures as well because I couldn't see them. And then... but it always felt limited. It always felt like a 1-for-1. Like I would have to do one weak move and then be able to use one strong move. And like I guess I can understand that pacing of it, but for yours and for Thursday, I feel like having all these options to engage in moves that supply token economy for everybody, like it's not even just like a selfish version, right? It's like both the lateral moves and the pillars give it to other people when you want to sort of intercede on the narrative. In fact, as you were talking about pillars and sort of your intent behind them, for me, I feel like it combines a lot of GMing elements that have these, like some variations that I mentioned is it reminded me of the GM interactions from Numenera, where when the GM intercedes on a scene, they have to supply like a resource or something like that. It reminds me of like locations, but also truths from Ironsworn, how these 4 pillars are things that are the setting, like these are a part of the story and they have to be interacted with, and so they will interact with you. And then it also kind of makes me feel like it has these elements from Band of Blades, where you have the commander roles, and everyone has sort of like a say about the GMing responsibilities, more of like the mechanical responsibilities than setting things. And I feel like pillars, this concept of pillars, is a very cool unison of all those pieces I like about those games. And I would love people to use this concept a lot more. I think it's like, I imagine going back to a trad game like D&D, right, where you say a truth like, oh, there is a necromancer. This even like does things like fronts for Dungeon World as well. This is very like fronts as well for me. It's like the necromancer, and create that sort of like pillars template, and then you can engage in necromancer moves throughout the entire series, because that's one of the main story beats, right? One of the main narrative pieces. So pillars is a claps. It's a claps. It's an applause. It's smart. I'm
Thank
here
you.
for it. I'm here to use it.
Hell yeah.
It's very good. Excuse me. So with those sort of changes, how did you adjust for like locations, right? Like, do the pillars also supplement for locations from BOB games? Like in Sleepaway, I know there's like the meadow and the lake and stuff like that. How did you account for those things, or not? Like, did you just decide to remove them?
So I have not read Sleepaway. Literally, so my Sleepaway thing is I was talking to Jay Dragon back when Jay was planning to kickstart it. And Jay was like, hey, do you want to write a stretch goal for this? And I was like, hell yeah, camp counselor game, give it to me. I was literally at the airport going to fly to like a camp counselor training seminar thing, which was great. And actually eventually led to me being one of the organizers for Doa-Kate. So that, shout out to Cornerstone. That was a great experience. But anyways, so I get Sleepaway and I read it and I'm like, oh, this is a horror game. Mm-hmm. I do not this really the idea of being a camp counselor and going back there, even though it's a horrible time and everyone is it really struck me and I was like, I'm sorry, this game looks cool. I cannot interact with it ever again. Sure. And Jay was like, yeah, no, I totally get it. So that was a long way. I just think that story's funny. So that is all to say, I have not read Sleepaway, so I don't know exactly what you're talking about with those locations. But I think that is a J Dragon thing, not a BOB thing.
Oh, her. Again, see my lack of experience with BOB, and thank you for being vulnerable about that story there as well.
Yeah. So, but there are places. So, again, I don't know. I'm assuming that the locations in Sleepaway are in some way a precursor to Nature's at Wanderhome, because that's where I kind of took. Mm-hmm. So I also have, along with the D66 table of traits, which I just stole from Wanderhome, I also have a D66 table of places, which I basically stole from Wanderhome. They're not quite as in depth as the Wanderhome ones. They don't have extra moves because I figured I had enough. Mine is already more overwhelming than a traditional BOB. So let's not go over our heads. Mm-hmm. So basically I just wrote 36 places, and you pick you choose 2 to 3 aesthetic elements, and then you choose 1 to 2 things that are rumored to be there. Mm-hmm. And so, those can kind of be, if you're not really sure what your plot is going to be, you can be like, oh, where are we? Oh, we're in a desert. That's cool. What if there's... I say these things as if I can remember what I wrote for those. Oh, there's rumored to be, an oasis with healing waters. Oh, what if we're trying to look for that because, one of our leaders is deadly sick, and so we have to get it before they die. Oh, that's cool. Okay, now, what happens in the desert? And you can also kind of take a couple of them and mush them together. Mm-hmm. Maybe there's a desert and right next to it is a metropolis. Mm-hmm. And you're kind of, you came from the desert into the city and you have to convince the politician to support you. I don't know. There's lots of different stories you can tell.
Yeah.
And so those are kind of what those are for. But they're the only thing in there that doesn't really have a big mechanical thing, because they're just kind of supposed to set the scene. Mm-hmm,
mm-hmm. It's not. Well, I think it's nice because in sort of the places you're providing a lot of narrative prompts, which I think is also something that a lot of traditional games don't. When I say trad games, I'm mainly speaking to the dragon in the room as far as that's concerned, but they don't really supplement. I know the DMG has a bunch of tables for villains and their motives and things, but it doesn't feel concrete. It doesn't give you anything specific to kind of jive with. So what I love about these in their simplicity of just being prompt generators is that they're very good prompt generators for creating really interesting things to touch on, and you can get so much out of just one area, right? So the desert, for those who may not have Galactic, but you should totally get Galactic, because I don't know why you don't already have it. It's a great case study for sure. But it's aesthetic elements. You have about 8 listed here. You get to pick 2 or 3 of them. The combinations are dozens and dozens. And then the sort of rumors, you get to pick 1 or 2 of them. There's about 6 or 7 listed, depending on the particular place in question. And again, the combinations there are at least 2 dozen. So and then in those combinations of combinations, you can just get so much from one of these sections just by picking different pieces. And then you get so many different types of narratives, also dependent on the playbooks that are in play and the moves that led up to this and the moves that are leading away from this and all those things. So I think it's a very good, fills the middle ground of all the heavy mechanical bits in that it's what is that analogy? It's that I don't know if anyone's heard. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but there's a story about this college professor comes in, has a jar, puts a bunch of ping pong balls in it, then puts some rocks, then fills it with some sand, and it's basically the concept of there's only so much room for so many different types of things, and when your jar is full, your jar is full. So what I'm basically alluding to, very long circle to get here, is that I think the places is the sand. Like, there's very cool, large, meaty ping pongs and rocks inside ping pong balls. Pong balls, I don't know what they're supposed to be called, but they're these very large...
I think we should just start calling them ping pongs. I love that.
Ping pongs!
You know, the game ping pong. You play with the ping pong?
Yes! Come get your ping pongs. Very large ping pongs to see and to really get an idea about. And then all the places are the sand that fills the rest of the jar and creates a very complete, full, voluminous narrative potential, which is and it's worth every dollar. There's no doubt about that. And it could be worth more because it's so smart. So, charge $50 for it. I don't know. Wizards of the Coast gets to charge $150 for their game, so fuck me, I guess.
God, yesterday I went out and I saw, my brother really wanted candy. There was, a candy shop. I went in. I was like, what are these little D20 tins? There's D&D branded candy, and I'm so mad. And now my mission is to get my own branded candy. I was talking about little wafers that are tokens, and when you do a strong move, you can eat them.
Oh god! But then you run out. That's genius. I think you should.
That's what you have to buy more.
Yeah. Riley is Business Central 101. Let's go. Let's go. Amazing. Anything else you sort of want to elaborate on Galactus, something that you think is really cool? Or were there any hardships in writing, something that just took a long time to come to fruition for you? Long time being relative because time is a concept.
Yeah. Yeah, it took a long time ago, and yeah, so with regard to things that took a long time, there is still a pretty big chunk of the game that I really like the sand thing, the idea of the ping pong balls in the sand, because I do feel that's very much how that game works, where some of it is these are the things that you do, and some of it's here's some other stuff if you want.
Mm-hmm.
So one of those here's some other stuff if you want is what I call paths, which are basically they're also very much taken from a bunch of J Dragons games,
Mm-hmm.
And the way that those games have different kind of oh, if you do this you get an extra move and stuff. And also, oh my god, what is it called? This Night on the Rooftops by CM Roosbach or something. I feel bad. I do not know their name. But which also has a kind of... I realized that I stole the name also. That game also has paths. I didn't realize that at the time. But basically they are... You can kind of choose, this is the journey that I want my character to go on. And this is more for, I haven't used them at all.
Mm-hmm.
That group that Jess has is the main playtest that I've had for them so far, because I do not have the time or energy to run longer games.
Mm-hmm.
But basically you kind of pick this is the journey that I want my character to go on. I'm interested in them turning to the dark side. I'm interested in them. One of them is called Gaining a Heart, which is kind of, maybe you're one of those, you're a Han Solo type, and you're I don't need anybody, and learning to have a community. There's one that's about training in the space between, which is my version of the Force. And so some of them are when you do this certain thing, you get a move. And some of them are you're searching for the answers to your past. And whenever you can ask this question and gain a token and fill in a segment of the clock. And when the clock fills up, then you find the answer. And I'm still working on them just because I really like the core idea of having these kind of frameworks that you can choose to have when you play longer games. And I've gotten some really good feedback from Jess and the other players in that game. But they just need a bit more work. I'm still not all of what I've said is kind of what I have now, but that's not exactly what I want it to be.
Mm-hmm.
Just because I want it to be more of a thing that they feel very tacked on, and I want them to be be able to be more incorporated into play. And I think I want to add stuff where there are paths where you can ask questions to players, and that's kind of the main thing, because I am the #1 Ask Left Questions fan. I'm a leftist. I like ask left questions. And so like I want it to be a lot more, which is why like I'm hoping to have it out soon because like there are at least 2 people who are like working on like hacks and stuff of them based on what I've already put out. So like I want to have mine out before they put theirs out. So we'll see. But I am excited about like the idea of paths. And then with regard to what else I'm excited about, I do really quick just want to talk about like the GM agnosticity of Galactic 2E because it's something that I think is really cool in games in general. Like I only started seeing stuff about GM agnosticity recently. I can't remember if it was Wander Home was the first one that I heard like it being talked about. I don't remember now. But it's definitely a word that I've started using, especially like in my brain that reads a GM'd game and goes, I could make this GM-less.
Yeah.
Like I read Aegon and I was like, there's no way this game needs a GM.
I've thought the exact same thing.
And I really want to play The House Doesn't Always Win, which I think would also be pretty easy to make GM-less. But Galactic 2E was very much written kind of taking from Wander Home in that respect of like I want like these things are so obviously like tools that people can use in a lot of different ways. Like you can play pillars, like you're saying, like those are based on GM stuff, and like that's not an accident. Like I think it would totally be a really good game if one person was in charge of all the pillars and then everyone else played characters, and like that would be pretty similar to a GM kind of game. But like when I was thinking about that, I was like, you could do more. Like you could be weirder about it. Like we don't have to have this dichotomy of like either everyone shares the pillars and playbooks or one person is in charge. Like what if you had a game of 4 players, 2 of them each had 2 of the pillars, and then the other 2 had like playbooks and they were playing characters. You could do that. You could have a game where there are 4 people, they're each in charge of a pillar, and then one person has one playbook and they are playing a single character on like a really weird journey where they're interacting with a bunch of NPCs and like forces and stuff. Like there's so many ways to do that, and like that was really important to me. That like Galactic 2E is more of like a toolkit. You can be like, I want to play this way because like honestly I didn't really think about that stuff until kind of like I didn't get to playtest a ton because I was working on this game while I was also doing internships for pharmacy school, so I didn't have like a ton of time to playtest. And so I didn't get a chance to playtest any of those versions, but I really want to now, like playing with, a couple people in charge of pillars and then 1 or 2 people with characters, because I think that would be really cool.
I have been on both of these. I have really interesting things that I'd like to elaborate with. One, for things you're proud of, talking about the different versions or modes of play of games. That's been kind of a hot thing in my mind right now because I interviewed Jeff Stormer, who has Anyone Can Wear the Mask, and it has some modes of play where you take out a player type and just have it interact like a 2-player mode. It has sort of like a solo mode. And then MV also wrote in modes for ASCII Delve as well. So just this concept of like, I think there's something about leaving behind the traditional sense of like, this game is designed for 3 to 4 players and only operates in one version. I think there's a better sell for games that have like, hey, we have like Iron Sworn was really hot because it had a solo version, a co-op version, and it could be GM'd if they wanted to. So I think there's something really to explore about modes of play, which is very fascinating that you bring up here. In that, also, like, I imagine a troop style one where one player is operating 4 playbooks and then there's another player who does all the pillars, right? Like, I don't know what that looks like in concept, but it's a version of the game that can be executed because of the way you've designed it. There's a lot of different ways to like slice up the pie, right? And then on the paths front, I've also been thinking about this concept of using basic narrative tropes like a revenge story or a redemption story or a horror story or something like that, and using it as like a piece of character creation. Like like you have an inciting incident, you have a mounting complication, you get your climax, and then you have your resolution, right? And these may all have like abilities attached to them, or they may not. Or you can, you maybe build up a meter that says, okay, now I can do my inciting incident, and let's see what that looks like on a personal level. Or if that's shared with like other characters at the table. Like I think there's something there about changing the concept. Like I was thinking about like D&D backgrounds and how they don't really matter at the end of the day. Like being an acolyte doesn't mean anything except to like be fuel for role play, right? Like I think that what it does do in D&D is that being an acolyte says like, oh, I am a person who is studying the faith in terms of this game, right? And so what if instead there was this whole story behind that, like see the rise and fall of a god when you pick this background, and like follow that trajectory and see what how you answer the questions that are presented to you along the way. And I think there's something really cool about paths there that I've also been tinkering with in my own case studies.
Yeah, that sounds really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, the other thing with paths is like I really want it to be like this is again is like a tool. It's not like when you pick a path you have to do everything on it and you have to see it through the end. Like you can fill up your clock to, almost the whole thing and then say, actually, I don't want to know, who my father is.
Yeah.
Like that's character development too. And like, maybe you count it as like finishing the clock, or maybe you say, nope, bye. I'm not getting that move at the end or whatever it is. Or, you can be like, I want to take this path because I want my character to be tempted by the dark side. God, I'm not going to call it the dark side. The darkness or whatever.
The void.
God. Except, like, it's only going to last 2 sessions, and then I want, the rest of the team to come in and save them or whatever. Like you can do that, and you can, like, play with that, and you can say, okay, now that, I've been de-radicalized, I'm getting rid of these 3 moves that I took or whatever, Like, it's not about, like, this is the thing that you have to do. It's like, you can choose this, therefore, your own story benefit.
Yeah, and it's the same thing. I think there's definitely something there about saying, like, it's the same effect as, like, flipping a coin between 2 options. It'll just tell you which one you really want. It won't decide for you. You will make the choice. It's like, ooh, do I want a hot dog or a salad today? Heads hot dog, tails salad, flip. Tails, nah, I want the hot dog. You know what I mean? Also, the answer is obvious here. So, I mean, unless you get things. But, yeah, I think there's something really interesting in about creating this mechanic that sort of details a potential narrative for you, and then always having an opt-out. Like, my clock, like you said, the father one is a perfect example of, like, you can walk into this room and see who your father is at this moment. And it's still within the character's purview to not open the door. They could just walk down the hall. I am too scared, or maybe they save it for later. Like, let's put it on pause. I don't want to do it right now, right? Like, there's a lot of different ways to manipulate that. So that's why I think it's really, 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 really cool. But I think what it helps, creating something like that helps create guidance for people who may not know those story beats or be able to develop those things in a clean way that doesn't get sort of murked out. Like I imagine the, 50 session D&D campaign where you sort of forget what you were doing by the time session 45 comes around. So I'm a big fan of goals. I'm a big fan of narrative goals because it creates sort of a direction for everybody. So pads are going to be sick.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
I hope so.
About trends. So, in your social circles, your communities, your own personal nebulous thoughts, what are some trends that you're seeing maybe across the internet, that are really cool that you want people to like really run with? What are maybe some trends that you find are a little detractful from the scene you want to caution people against? Or is there any trend within you that you want to speak out into the ether as like a free idea for whoever may be listening to the show?
Yeah, so the big trend that I've been seeing that I really like and hope people continue with is just like, this is something that is not in Galactic 2E at all, is like cool stuff with cards, like cool mechanical things. Like I said, I really want to play The House Doesn't Always Win because like that has such a cool like gambling, like card counting, wow, mechanic. It does so much cool stuff with cards. The big one that like blew my mind, that kind of is similar in some ways, is Tension by Adira Slattery. Oh, I should say The House Doesn't Always Win is by Wheels Wellen. Like Tension is really cool. It uses a tarot deck, and all of the major arcana are characters. And so, like, you are dealing out characters in the same way that you're dealing out, like, the moves that you can do with those other, like, the minor arcana, I think, are, like, kind of actions that you do. Like, that is, it's so cool to me. And I kind of have two games that, one of them is, like, genuinely in development. It will come out, probably in the fall, that I am working on with one of my best friends, Laura, who we met in high school. And I got her into game design, and it makes me so happy. And so she's like the biggest Les Mis fan in the world. And so we're working on like a Les Mis inspired game that like I am so excited about. It's a game of mini games, and each of them, all you need is a deck of cards. And so like it's been really cool to try to make all of those games because there's I think 13 that we have right now, which I think will be that's it. Yeah. That's all we got. I don't think we need any more at this point. Like each of them, we wanted to have like a distinct, unique mechanic, so like it didn't confuse people, and so like it's really like been stretching kind of our like game design. Like for example, we were working on it. The reason it's going to take so long to come out is because we work on it like twice a month when our schedules line up, and like that's it. It's a good way to do game design though. Just little short bursts. So, like, last week, we were hanging out, and we're trying to work on it, and we decided we wanted a game, like a trial game, where one person is kind of pleading their case, and the other person is the judge. Les Mis fans will probably recognize where this comes from. And it was like, okay, we want this to be different from the confrontation game, which is kind of about two people on equal footing trying to argue or fight or, like, whatever, like two people competing at this like equal ground. We want this to be like the judge has all of the power and the defendant or whatever you want to call them like just kind of is like doesn't have that. And so like my first instinct was like just for a trial game was basically do the thing that we do for the confrontation game, which is basically like which don't get me wrong, I love that game too. It has some cool stuff. I don't want to give it all away, but I'm really proud of like the way that kind of works. But basically, it's just war 2 out of 3. You draw one card each, and then whoever has the higher card wins, and it's 2 out of 3. So like that was kind of my first thought for it, right? Where you're like arguing, but because we'd already used that, we were like, well, this has to be different, and so like that really got us to think of like what would like really really work. So we ended up with this, like, really cool game where the defendant is basically, like, gambling. Where, like, every time they, like, make a case, like, there's different moves they can do, say, like, ask for forgiveness, provide an alibi, whatever. Every time they do that, the judge is drawing a new card. And it's, like, a gambling thing because the higher the card value, the worse the punishment is. And the judge can only pick from the cards that they have. So you might just do one thing. The judge draws an ace, and then you say, I'm done. And then they say, well, I have to let you go. Or you might, do your one thing. The judge draws a king. And the judge is like, listen, I didn't want to have to do this, but,
yeah.
And so like, it's a very cool kind of thing that, like, we never would have come up with if, like, we didn't have all these other games. And I am just... I think that, like, there's a lot of potential with cards and the way that they work. Oh, and then the other game that's, like, in development in the sense that I think it's really cool, and sometimes I try to work on it, and then I go, ugh, this is never gonna get finished.
You and me both.
Is a game that started kind of as like, oh, this would be an interesting like dungeon crawl, I guess. And then Hades came out, and I was like, yeah, it's this thing.
It's this.
And like that was like, God, Hades was like a lightning strike of like, I don't play video games, so like I haven't played it. I have complicated feelings about, like, I've watched a bunch of cutscenes and like, you know, I have a lot of problems with it, but like, God, that game was just like the perfect burst of inspiration for this game. Where basically like you have a tarot deck and a regular deck of cards. The tarot deck represents the rooms that you're going into, and then the deck of cards represents like the extra enemies and the items that you have and whatever else is in the game, something else. Like you have like money and you also have items. And so like it's a very cool like core loop that I want to add a bunch of stuff, like more stuff to, where like, you know, you have enemies and like I've written some of them already where like you have, you know, like, oh, you drew the King of Hearts and that means that it's like this person, and when you defeat them then you mark this thing, and when you've defeated them enough times you get a bunch of stuff, and you know, will it ever happen? Who knows?
Hades, great game. I've also been playing Curse of the Dead Gods, which is a similar genre of game. I know you said you don't play a ton of video games, but the point I latch on to that specifically is because in the thing I was told you about a little bit off mic of this thing that's been grabbing my mind and I can't let it go, is sort of like taking the dungeon delve concept. It combines like two things. It takes the dungeon delve concept and tries to combine like the Metroidvania feel of like having special powers that unlock specific paths in a dungeon. So like in concept, you might go to, I'm going to use D&D so that it's easy to like delineate abilities. But like you go to a temple, like it's classified as a temple space. And one of the ways to open this door with a god's face in the recess is that a paladin has to divine smite it to open it up. There's no other way to open up this door. So like sort of the concept of lock and keys is to figure out how to integrate this. I need a specific ability to go in beyond the dungeon. And people are like, well, if you do that, they can't explore the dungeon. And I say, why is that a bad thing? Just record it and come back later, right? This very cool, like, and then that creates like the run essentially from these roguelike games like Hades or Curse of the Dead Gods or Slay the Spire is also an example of this in a way. And it's just this concept of like, cool, we'll come back, we'll do the run again when we have the particular ability. You don't complete a run if you don't have all the stuff unlocked. Like, it's hard to. So I find it really interesting that you have also landed on figuring out sort of a similar. I'm also using playing cards, but I'm using like fighting game mechanics to sort of delineate my stuff. But we should chat about some things after this. We should chat about some things. Any other trends that you want to speak to as far as this section in particular goes?
I think I mean, I don't want to be like mean or say that like, I guess my other thing is like, I wish that more people would, and maybe I'm just not being fair and I'm just not looking at the right games, but I feel like I have a very particular taste in like layout, and that I want it to, like I make mine very simple. Like I want the game to kind of stand out, and like I don't want to say like people should stop doing layout that I don't like, because like not everyone is me.
Yeah.
But I think there is a trend recently of like people wanting to do these like crazy gonzo like layouts that sometimes sacrifice readability and like understandability for like style, and like that's totally valid. Like I'm going to say like because this game doesn't do the thing that I want, that means that like it's bad, because like I am a person who can appreciate like Dadaism because it's cool like like I am not a visual art person. I'm the person who goes to an art museum and reads all of the plaques because that's what I find interesting, So like, it's fine. But I do at least want people to know like you don't have to do that. Like like there are a bunch of different ways to make games, and like I'm really proud of my layouts, and I think that like they do a good job conveying, you know, like the recent ones,
Yeah.
the ones that aren't really old and are just downloaded Google Docs. Like I really want to make sure that it's like, you know, the game is first, because I am like very much just a mechanics enjoyer. I read games and I'm like, wow, that's such a cool mechanic, you know? Like that's my favorite part of it. I like game design. I don't know if you would expected me to say that, but like I really like game design.
Hey, there might be. I don't know if anyone on the show doesn't like game design and has talked about game design. So thanks for saying it. Now challenge all of the 36 guests to be like, do you like game design? Hit me at Jeremy Gage 5. It's fine. I think here's the thing. One, I guess to preface this, visual layout is subjective. It is an art form. Game design is an art form.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I am also in a space of agreeance. I had Clayton Notestein on here who talked about visual layout and sort of it's supposed to be something that creates clarity and it adds to the experience rather than takes away from the experience of the game. And then I also had the designers behind Gem Room Games, Collie Laurie and Dan Phipps, who talked about their game Duckborg. Wait, did I get that right? Yes, Duckborg. In that a lot of people have been trying to like when Morkborg came out, it was like, oh, this thing gives us permission to like go absolutely ape shit with design, with like visual design. And that's not necessarily true because there is a code to crack on Morkborg's design. On the stuff that's like less important to the game mechanics, sure, it's super gonzo and artistic and uses 18 different fonts on a single page. But on the sections of the book that talk about how to operate the game, it is clean, it is clear, it is understandable. And I think some people are missing that. And there is a delicate balance between creating something that is software, right? Like a game is technically software that you're running in the computer of your mind, and something
wow, I love that.
and something that is an art piece, right? Something that is like when you look at Morkborg for the first time, it's like, holy shit, this makes me feel things. But, and I'm not saying Morkborg is the only game that does that, but there's a balance that Morkborg has struck where it is both an art piece that looks nice to have inside of your space that you can show off to people, and it is also software your computer can read. Otherwise, if you create just an art piece, are you trying to run like an iOS app on your Windows computer? Because that's not gonna fly. You know what I mean? Like, it's in one ecosystem of design space. Actually, now that I've made this analogy, I'm now trying to like box in every game that like makes me feel like I'm on a different operating system than everywhere else.
God, that's so powerful.
The Jeremy
yeah,
OS.
I mean, like to be clear, I am the kind of person who looks at Morkborg and goes, no, can you take away all that? Like,
Yeah,
can you just give me a Google Doc? Like, I am a person who like I'm like physically incapable of like doing a lot of like, especially like, even if it's not being printed out, I'm like, I want as much game as possible on a single page without it being overwhelming, because like I just want to take it all in. Like that's how I enjoy like reading games, is just like just give it to me, just show me all the mechanics. And like obviously, like, you know, I'm sure someone is screaming at their phone right now, like, but the layout helps with the game design sometimes. And like, yes, that is absolutely true. And you know, I'm sure that there's 1,000 games that I like right now that I could point to and be like, yeah, this proves me wrong. But also like that's also just how I feel.
I think the thing to take away from this particular trend is to denote that you can definitely overdo it with visual design. I don't think this is a space where either of us are saying like, don't do visual design, don't like really try to like push the boundaries on graphic design for your game. But there is a point at which it starts to harm its accessibility to a general amount of individuals rather than a select few who just may not like your particular visual motifs.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Any trends within yourself that you want to speak out into the ether?
I wish that I had a good answer for that, because that's fun. I don't know. I want to see Galactic 2 e-hacks so bad.
Sure.
Like, I mean, I have one planned eventually, because like we were speaking about binge watching earlier, and another big one for me was I watched all 38 episodes. They're like 45 minutes to an hour episodes of Black Sails in 4 days, like a year and a half ago. I think, maybe, I don't know, time is fake again. And like ever since then, I was like, I'm going to write a Black Sails game, and like I've had like so many different ideas that have just like gone nowhere, and then I made Galactic 2E, and I was like, yes, perfect. So I'm going to eventually make my Black Sails game. I feel like it's become a joke, like to me, where I'm like, when I make my Black Sails game,
I'll be.
But I think Kazumi-chan is the only one who would recognize that joke, because they like to joke about me never making that game. But one day. But besides that, I feel like there's a lot. Like I really like somebody to write like a Royal Intrigue one, because I really enjoy Royal Intrigue. You know, I'm sure there's a bunch of stuff. I made a tweet at some point that was like, here's all the cool things you could do with it. And I can't think of them right now. But I really would like to see that. And not just because like, oh, do my thing. But also like do my thing but better. Like I'd love to see people add on to like because so much of Galactic 2E is like taking stuff from Wanderhome and obviously Belonging Outside Belonging and kind of putting my spin on it. And I'd love to see like then people take my stuff and put their own spin on it, you know, like that's game design. I love it.
I love it. And Galactic 2E is definitely a hackable game. Like really create a specific like story experience, like setting experience, right? This is hardcore like Star Wars distilled, right? So could you execute that with like The Crown, right? Like if you were talking about Royal Intrigue, or could you do like Westworld, right? Things like that. Could you execute on Game of Thrones, right? As trash as the last seasons were, but could you execute that in the way of like the pillars are the families, right? Like what if each pillar was like the Starks, the God, it's been so long. The Lannisters. Others. Someone who knows better than I. If you're listening to this, you can go wiki the houses. I'm not going to do it right now. I'm not.
Yeah, I am constantly just wanting something in my life that's Game of Thrones but good. I never watched the show, but I did read the first book and a half, and I was like enthralled by it. And then I just kind of stopped after that. Just because, I don't know. I think I was at a point where I couldn't use my phone, and so I just was reading. And then I got my phone back, and I was like, well.
Back to the internet I go. Boop.
But, like, yeah, that is, like, what I want. Like, I love the way that it has, like, all of these different points of view, and they, like, all are kind of jerks, but also, like, they have, like, their reasons, and, like, they're vying for power. Oh, yeah, I really do want that. Please, someone write Game of Thrones Galactic 2E.
Yeah, I think it could be done for sure. Amazing, good, great, good. Riley, thumbs up. Last little bit here for the show, because we're reaching the hour 20 mark here. Tips and tricks per Riley. Let's see what we can give the people today. So normally, I've now reached the point in my career of this show where I'm not using the dice rolls anymore because I roll a lot of 4s. A lot of people talk about marketing, and they're not well equipped to talk about marketing. So says them. I think otherwise because they have games that have sold and I don't. So as far as marketers, they're relatively more superior than I am. Is there a tip that you can give for sort of the game designs? We've talked a lot about how you've been taking inspirations and putting them into sort of distilled experiences of game design. What is your process for going about doing that? What's some things that you find yourself repeating in your process? I know every process is probably a little bit different, but what's something like what's a way you start, or maybe what's something you sort of examine when you come to a roadblock, things like that?
Yeah, so I don't know how much it would apply to my BOB games, just because like that is like a system that already exists, which isn't my usual thing. Like I feel like I've kind of been trapped by BOB the past like, a little over a year, which is super weird because 2019 I released like a bajillion games and I've released like 3 in like since 2020.
Time.
Yeah. 2020 sure was a time. But like what I do like doing, and what I really want to go back to after I get the rest of the Galactic 2E stuff like poured out of my brain, is like different systems with like new mechanics, which is what I'm doing with me and Laura's game Music of a People. And I start with figuring out like what do I want this game to be about. Like, okay, I do generally take inspiration from like one or two things. Just because I don't consume a lot of media. Like I consume a lot of media in short bursts, but I don't really consume like a lot of it. Like I feel like people have these things where they're like, oh yeah, it was inspired by like these 7 different TV shows and movies. And I'm like, well, it was inspired by these like 8 different games and this one TV show that I watched. Which, you know, however you choose to experience media, that's valid. What was I saying? Yeah, but like, so, you know, I'll take like, let's say, what's a good, like my best example would be The Riot Starts, which is my Hadestown inspired game. And so I was like, I want to make a game based on Hadestown. That could be a lot of things. Other people have made games based on Hadestown. There's some good ones out there that are very different from mine. Like, what do I want mine to be? Well, what I really want is like an alternate universe where Orpheus decides to stay and do a revolution, because like that is what I am constantly imagining in my mind. Like, okay, so that's a thing. I want it to be like about a revolution. What else interests me about Hadestown? Like, why do I want this to be about Hadestown specifically? Well, Hadestown has these great themes about, not the Broadway version, do not interact. I'm talking about the ones before that. Listen to the New York Theater Workshop and the concept album. It has these great themes of like isolation versus like connection, in the way that like having relationships and having connections to other people is really important, in the way that like when we don't feel like we have those connections, we feel isolated and can be taken advantage of and like can lose our way. So I want that to be like a core part of this game. Those are probably the main things. Oh, and also like you're dead. You're all dead. You're in the underworld. And like a lot of that flavor kind of influenced it too. But those were kind of the main things. And so it took me a while to come up with those mechanics, which is why like I think it's a really good example in my mind, because like I was spending months being like, okay, I'm almost there. I have dice and they do a thing. I don't know. And the real like breakthrough moment was like, oh, what if it's not everyone individually has these like stats or whatever? What if you have like a collective dice pool? And then like you also have these individual ones for like stuff that you do that's like bad, or like you know, like that's the isolation, but the ones that are about community are in the center. And that's kind of how I came up with the main mechanic of the game, which is like you have these I believe they're just called die generation moves, where basically like every playbook has one, which was like a very early inspiration from BOB, of being like, okay, but what if there was one move and you could make it either strong or weak depending on how you did it. And so if you do your move in a way that is beneficial to your cause and like helps bring people together, then you put it in the middle community pool. And if you do it in a way that's selfish, then you do it in your alienation, is what I called it. You have your alienation dice. And then you roll all the dice once you finish with a round, and whatever has the highest numbers, then like that's the one that wins. So like, you know, if community wins, then that's like a good thing for your evolution. If isolation wins, then it might be bad. So that's kind of how that came together. Was that I guess that kind of just ended up me being talking about The Riot Starts. But like I think the main thing there is like, at least like the way that I do it is, I think like, okay, I want to make a thing based on this, you know, story that I like. What about that story? Because like you know, you could make a Hadestown game that has nothing to do with that at all. Like I think there is one that's like a solo game where you play Orpheus, like being tempted, and like that's by definition not in my game. Or I think there's also one that's kind of similar to that. That's like a 2-player game in the same respect. And you know, there's totally other games. Oh, and there's like Heaven in the Dust. Oh my God, there's Heaven in the Dust by Luke Jordan. Games from the Wildwood, a fantastic BOB game that was like a huge inspiration to me. The first BOB game, I'm pretty sure, to say ask one left and one right instead of just ask one left, which is like important to me.
It's good.
Which is like a totally different kind of like taking the inspiration of the like Dust Bowl-esque setting of Hadestown, and being like, what if you played gods, except they weren't gods, they were like people in the Dust Bowl. Like, it rules. It's very good. So like there's so many different things you can do, and you have to say like, what interests me specifically, like what do I want, like because it's not just about saying like, what do I want to be like present in this game that is also in the story. It's also about saying like, what do I want to be able to be different, right? Like sometimes I'll be thinking about a game and then I'll be like, wait, like what do I even like Teen Beach Movie is a Disney Channel original movie from 2013 that is very deeply important to me. I'm going to make everyone that follows me on Twitter watch it eventually. And like I keep thinking like, I want to make a game about this, but it's so hard for me to decide like what part of it I can let go of. You know, like, do I want this to be a game about people who fall into their favorite movie and meet the people and everything else, like all of the kind of themes about Jesus Christ, about kind of like the social pressures of like existing in the 50s and blah blah blah, you know, like and kind of like not being able to be yourself. Like, do I want to throw that stuff away, or do I want it to be about like people meeting each other and you know, like finding out that there are different ways of existing, and do I want to throw away the whole like going into a movie musical, like, you know, like it's so hard for me to let go of any of that. So that game is never going to be made, because if I tried to write the game, it would just be play out the events of Teen Beach Movie, and like that's not a good game. So like figuring out like what are like the core things that I want to be like, these are the themes that I want, and these are the themes that like I want this game to be about, and then also being like, and you know, with that, like, what are the things that I want people to be able to fill in and stuff.
Yeah, I was gonna say with those two examples, it sounds like the two things that, and this is me as an outside observer based on 2 points of interaction for Riley's entire persona. But based on those 2 examples, it seems like you try to find the core that you resonate with so deeply about a particular narrative or something, or inspiration, and then you find the twist. Like you say, okay, I want to do Hadestown, but instead Orpheus stays for Revolution, right? Like, it's the instead part. Like, I want to do this thing, but instead. And I feel like that is a very interesting process to go around, because I think it allows for you to, and why in coupling with Teen Beach Movie is that you can't find the core because you love every facet of the movie, right? So you can't like distill to the piece.
It's perfect. I'm sorry.
Yeah. It is the perfect piece of media. You are all sleeping.
Yeah. Citizen Kane, Paddington 2, never heard of him. Teen Beach Movie. Please.
Where are you at? At me. Or don't at me. But you know, you can't find the core of that. So how do you twist it, right? What do you want to make different about something that you sort of have a encompassing love about, right? And maybe there's something there. Maybe it's about stepping back and saying like, okay, the core is the entirety of Teen Beach Movie. How can I twist on top of that, right? Like, I
mean, listen. That would be the kind of thing that they would do. Like it's very meta. But yeah. Listen, I'll get there eventually. Yeah. But yeah, that's definitely like a good way to put it. Like all of my games, not all of them, all of my games that I'm like, this is based on this thing. Because not all of them are. All of those are just like me being like, man, I really wish that I could like this. You know, like Hadestown is something that's very important to me and I love it. But, you know, especially with the Broadway version that they just absolutely ruined in like a story way and a politics way, it's just awful. It's ugh. But like I wrote The Right Starts before I watched Hadestown, the first performance after the Tonys, after like they won all the Tonys, and sobbed my way through most of it because I was so disappointed by all the change that they made. Except for I sobbed during If It's True, because they changed those lyrics to be like hyping up for Revolution, and I was like, oh my god, this is my game. And that was like happy tears. But then right after that they went into a song that no longer made sense because of the lyrics that they changed, and I was like, it's God. I mean, I could, and I did. I was on a podcast once to talk about Doakate and ended up going on like a 20-minute rant about Hadestown. So like, it is in fact like that. I don't remember what I was saying now.
You saying that it was a good way to
just like all of my games that are explicitly based on something are like, like Galactic 2E was like, man, Star Wars has some really cool ideas. I don't care about like what they're doing in most of the movies. Like I want to I want to take that and like be able to tell my own stories with it. The Riot Starts was like, Hadestown has some really cool stuff, and I do like the ending of that. It's not like I'm like, ugh, the tragedy is too sad. But like, what if it was this other thing? Because like that's the thing that it makes me think about. Probably other examples, but yeah, a lot of my games are based on like a weird partial spite.
Well, yeah, I think that's maybe the twist isn't particularly like the true version of that distillation of this tip. Maybe it's more of like, what is the core and how do I embellish it, right? Like, what is this thing that I love so deeply about this particular piece of inspiration, and how do I make it bigger, grander? Like, how do I talk about the pieces that are sort of unexplored by the home property, the home intellectual property, right?
Yeah.
I think that's very cool, and I think it's very I feel woke right now. I hope that there are listeners that are tasting the juice and also waking up, because I think that it's good. Amazing. That was brilliant, Riley. Do you have anything else for the listeners before we head into closing here?
I don't think so.
Great. Well, then, Riley, as we approach an hour and a half here, it has been an absolute gem of a pleasure to have you on the show. For the last bit here, would you once again tell people where they can find you, find your games, get in contact with you if they want to get in contact with you? All of these places that Riley is about to mention will be in the show notes for your access, listeners.
Yeah, cool. Thank you for having me. I also had a blast. So
that's an animal press.
You can find me on Twitter at Riley Rethal. You can find my games at metagame.itch.io. You can specifically find Galactic. I mean, it's also just like on the first row, so it shouldn't be hard, but you can find that at metagame.itch.io/galactic. Oh, actually, there is one more thing. Just because I mentioned like Galactic 2E hacks and stuff. I'm running, I was kind of peer pressured into running a Galactic 2E game jam on itch, which like I was not expecting so many people to like do that already. Like there's already like 8 or 9 things, and it's only been going for like maybe 2 weeks. Like not even, I don't think. And so like that's very cool. So you should check those out because those are very good. Make your own if you want. I love it. I'm working on like a cyberpunk expansion eventually. I really would love to see more people do like, because all of them have kind of been like, oh, these are Star Wars tropes that I'm like doing, and like those are obviously awesome, but I'd love to see people be like, what if other stuff?
Yeah. What if other thing good?
What if you just had Captain Kirk in Star Wars? I don't know. Do it.
Yeah.
I'm not writing that. Somebody else can take
that. Great. Amazing. Well, everyone, it has been amazing to listen to Riley here today. I've learned a lot. I hope you did too. And we will catch you on the next episode. Say bye to the people, Riley.
Bye.
Bye. All right, that's a wrap. Thank you for taking the time to sit down and hang out with Riley and I. We really appreciate it. You can find links and resources down below in the show notes, such as getting in touch with Riley or other episodes with similar topics. If you want to be a part of the conversation, please come and join the community Discord server. Also, make sure to subscribe to the Draw Your Dice Patreon, where you can get access to early releases of episodes from as soon as we interview. Thanks again for stopping by, and as always, I will catch you next time.